One of the times we are most prone to daydreaming is when we are in love. We dream up scenarios such as imaginary meetings and fictional flirtations, playing out these fantasies in our minds, where we have complete control over the dream. In the end, it's possible to insert any scenario we want into this fantasy. To ignite the spark in this dream, we don't need to receive significant signals from the other person. If we are emotionally empty, even the smallest signal can reflect in our imagination and turn our minds into a full-length love film. A person in love is ready to be swept away from the start. Imagine a lover who daydreams obsessively, expending absurd amounts of mental energy on these fantasies, only to eventually realize that these dreams were empty. They see that the other person doesn't view them in the same way, and the reality that all the time and energy spent on dreaming contain no authenticity hits them like a slap in the face. What does this person do? Perhaps they blame the other person and become angry, or perhaps they accept that they were the one who started the dreams and take responsibility. This part is unknown, but one thing is certain. In the end, the dreamer will realize that imagination is dangerous. Of course, it has its good sides. Humans create inventions and artworks through their imagination, designing them first in their minds, and then bringing them into reality. However, it's also important not to overlook the destructive impact that imagination, especially when focused on human relationships, can have when it faces reality. Dostoevsky's White Nights is different from the author's other works. It does not deal with challenging topics like the existence of God, the problem of evil, or death, but rather tells the story of a romantic dreamer. Throughout the story, we sometimes feel pity for the dreamer and get irritated, though not as intensely. However, within all of us, there is a dreamer because the protagonist of the story, who also serves as the narrator, does not have a specific name. Therefore, let's call this 26-year-old male character the dreamer. This dreamer, whose greatest joy is to walk through the gloomy streets of St. Petersburg, is a very lonely man with no one to confide in, but he has a bad day friend, his imagination. Whenever he becomes tired of life, he turns to his imagination for solace. He talks to, converses with, and even falls in love with imaginary people. In the dreamer's solitary life, we see a new chapter open when he meets a charming girl named Nastenka. One night, while taking his beloved evening walks, the dreamer notices a crying young girl who mystically affects him. However, he can't muster the courage to start a conversation with her. The girl slowly starts walking towards her home. At that moment, a middle-aged man, presumably drunk, follows the girl. The dreamer quickly senses that this drunk man is a potential harasser and rushes to the girl's side, asking her to take his arm. The girl immediately takes his arm, and the two of them manage to evade the drunk man. Reluctantly, the dreamer seizes the wonderful opportunity to get to know the girl and accompanies her to her home. During this time, a sweet conversation takes place between them, and the dreamer enjoys it so much that he asks Nastenka to meet again the next day. Nastenka agrees to meet again, but she has already realized that the dreamer is affected by her. Nastenka prefers to be upfront about her feelings and says to the dreamer, "But look, with one condition. First, do what I ask of you. You see, I am speaking openly. Don't fall in love with me. It's impossible. Believe me, I'm ready to extend my hand to you, but falling in love is impossible. I ask you not to." Although the dreamer is promised that Nastenka will not fall in love with him, Nastenka knows deep down that this promise is not sincere. Eventually, they arrive at Nastenka's home, and the dreamer heads towards his own house. Now, Nastenka has become the new heroine in the dreamer's imagination, and he eagerly looks forward to their next meeting. Thus ends our first night. To summarize, we have a dreamer who has fallen head over heels for a girl and Nastenka, who believes in the philosophy of let's not fall in love but remain friends. Let's move on to the second night. On the second night, it is clear that there is a chemistry between the two, though not romantic or sexual. It is obvious that they enjoy each other's conversation. However, this time, Nastenka makes an interesting statement. Let's start from the beginning and get to know each other. I acted a bit childish yesterday. Today, I want to get to know you better. This statement renews hope for the dreamer because the girl who told him not to fall in love is now asking to start fresh and get to know each other. The dreamer is filled with hope about love. Nastenka expresses her desire for the dreamer to talk about his life. Despite the fatigue after work, the dreamer talks about how his imagination, which starts from a small spark, grows into something real and fulfilling, making him feel as if he is experiencing real-life dreams. Imagination is rejuvenated and vividly brings forth a new world, a new enchanting life with the brightest perspective. New dreams, new happiness, new delightful, seductive poison. What is it to us compared to our real life? Nastenka believes that a true, genuine passion excites her soul. She believes in the live presence of useless dreams and, unwillingly, finds the dreamer's story moving. By the end, Nastenka can't hold back her tears. Now it's time for Nastenka to tell her story. Nastenka, though not as much as our main character, is also a dreamer. After the death of her parents, Nastenka lives with her blind grandmother. One day, according to her, she commits a form of indecency. The book does not specify what this indecency is, but afterward, her grandmother becomes excessively protective of her. There is an extra vacant apartment in the attic of Nastenka and her grandmother's house. One day, a young man comes to rent the apartment. Since the grandmother cannot see, she does not know what the tenant looks like. Nastenka asks if the man is handsome, and when the answer is yes, the grandmother panics immediately. The grandmother is an old-fashioned woman and is worried that her granddaughter might fall for this handsome tenant. This possibility, though hard to predict, becomes a reality. The tenant likes Nastenka and constantly sends her books to read. They chat briefly whenever they meet in the corridor. The tenant even proposes going to the theater. A romance begins to form between them, but it doesn't last long. The tenant eventually brings sad news to Nastenka, saying that he must vacate the apartment due to financial issues and needs to go to Moscow to earn money. This departure will last at least a year. Nastenka is devastated. She offers to run away with him, but all her efforts are in vain. He is determined to leave, but he makes a promise to Nastenka. He says that he will return to Petersburg in a year and marry her if she still loves him. During this year, there is no news from the tenant. He neither appears nor sends a letter. Let's return to the moment when the dreamer first met Nastenka. Nastenka was in tears because a year had passed and she had received no response from her beloved. This is Nastenka's story. The dreamer listens to this story with interest. After the two of them have poured out their hearts, their relationship has naturally evolved beyond mere friendship. As readers, we wonder if a romance between Nastenka and the dreamer is possible, considering how they complement each other like puzzle pieces. We think their relationship might evolve from a shared concern into a romance. We also notice how similar these two characters are. The dreamer feels for Nastenka what he felt for the tenant. There is a sort of mirror symmetry between them. Both are incredibly romantic and dreamers, and both suffer from an intense hunger for passionate love. As we move to the third night, the dreamer expresses perhaps the most striking statements in the book. How beautiful happiness and joy make a person feel, how the heart boils with love, and how one wants to pour all their heart into another's. Everything should be cheerful and joyful. This joy, in its abundance, makes a person feel they are in a delightful state of affection. The dreamer thought he was taking all this in a positive light, but he realizes how blind he was, knowing that it was meant for someone else. The kindness, attention, and love he received were nothing but a reflection of the other person's joy in meeting someone new and a desire to spread happiness. From these striking statements, we understand that the dreamer is a character much more intelligent than we initially thought. Although he appeared as a bewildered lover at the beginning, he is aware of the events. He even knew that his warmth towards him was motivated by the excitement of achieving his own passion. On the fourth night, the dreamer wants to write a letter to Nastenka, but because his writing skills are not strong, he seeks help, and the dreamer will send the letter. Nastenka, who is running out of patience, is about to give the dreamer one last chance. When the dreamer meets Nastenka, he asks if there is a reply to his letter. Receiving a no in response to the letter, Nastenka declares that she will no longer give the man she loves another chance, stating that she no longer loves him and even hates him. At this moment, the dreamer seizes the opportunity and speaks about his love for Nastenka. He tells her that, just as Nastenka loved the tenant, he loves her too. Nastenka is surprised or pretends to be surprised. In reality, she had known from the beginning that the dreamer was in love with her, but she had acted as though she didn't know. At that moment, Nastenka makes a radical decision and accepts the dreamer's love, saying that their relationship could turn from friendship into a romantic one. The dreamer becomes the happiest person in the world upon hearing these words. They discuss how they will get married. Just then, a figure emerges from the darkness. As we guessed, this figure is the tenant. Although it's a bit late, he has finally arrived. Nastenka runs toward her true love, leaving the dreamer behind. The dreamer describes the situation with Nastenka as follows. My God, what a cry, how startled I was, how she slipped from my arms and leaped toward him. I stopped and looked at them like a dead person. But as soon as Nastenka gave him her hand, she threw herself into his arms. In an instant, she turned back to me like the wind or lightning, right at my side. And before I could come to my senses, she embraced me with both arms and kissed me passionately. Then, without saying a word, she leapt back to him, holding his hands and dragging him away. I watched them for a long time, and finally, they disappeared from view. The final part of our story is different from the rest. It is early morning. The dreamer wakes up and sees that he has received a letter from Nastenka. In the letter, Nastenka first apologizes to the dreamer. She admits that although she briefly entertained the idea of a relationship with him, she led him on unnecessarily. She also mentions that she will marry the tenant in a week and expresses a desire to see the dreamer at her wedding. At this moment, the dreamer realizes how ugly real life is. We understand why this character retreated into his imagination. Deep down, when we take away his fantasy world, we see the emergence of a pessimistic soul. The dreamer suddenly perceives everything around him, the streets, the housekeeper's home, as bleak. Reality begins to seem ugly to him. 15 years later, he thinks about his future, knowing that he will age alone in his decaying room. The dreamer harbors no resentment towards Nastenka, as she has awakened his imagination and pulled him away from his gloomy world. Therefore, despite everything, the dreamer accepts Nastenka.